Okay, this is a video that is inspired by listening to some of these replies, but it's not a specific reply. It's interesting. Sometimes I see the videos and I have ideas, and they're obviously related to what I've been watching, but they're not exactly responses in the sense that I'm not making a counterpoint that's related to one of their points directly. Instead, I'm putting a new, or really, this isn't the new. I'm going to re-describe what I think the situation is. Okay, so I have this chart, and it's epistemological, and it's a decreasing level of certainty from the bottom. Okay, so if I do the Descartes meditative, exercise, I doubt everything that I can doubt. I doubt. He got down to I think, therefore I am. I think he didn't get that quite right. He couldn't really know that he was the one thinking, for example. That is not as certain as can be. So, what do we have at the bottom? We have that I perceive, therefore I am. I don't know that I think. I don't say I cause the perceptions or not. I simply say that I'm having the perceptions. Because while in the traditional classical philosophy we'd like to go all the way down to the most abstract principles that are just solid because the principles themselves are solid, I don't think we can do that. We have to go down to the human condition. And that's right, that means that it'd be a different meditation if we were a dog or some other kind of creature, or if we were a human trying to say, well, what is it like for a cockroach, We're saying, what do I know best of all as a human? I know that I receive perceptions. Okay, on top of that, here, I build a model about the patterns in perceptions. How do perceptions behave? And at this level, basically, I have a subjective view of myself. So not only do I have the perceptions, but I'm saying something about the perceptions. Like, some of the perceptions seem quite consistent, and, there's these different sense spaces. I can categorize some perceptions as being, sound-like in nature, and some are visual in nature, and so on. It's basically still solipsistic because I haven't granted that there's anything other than me and my perceptions, okay? I have not granted that there's some other creature having its own perceptions, okay? Now, after I've done that, based on these patterns, I can create a model of materialism, okay? And this is, again, from perceptions, and the way this works really well is you have your perceptions, you generate a model, and then if you can use that model right then the model is descriptive. But if you use that model to predict what a future perception that you haven't had will be, suddenly that becomes descriptive as well. And this is how we get faith in these models. But it's still on top of our subjective experiences, right? Our model of materialism. Then, using that model of materialism, we come up with a materialistic model of perception. Okay? And this is where we start to get confused. In this material model of perception, we know that objects are out there, and we consider them as objects. And what is the view of the self in that model? It's the view of the self as a third person. Okay. Now this is where we get confused, because we want to say, hey, we figured out how our perceptions are made. We have this model of perception. So shouldn't it go down here below this one? Down here off the screen below? Because that's where our perceptions are coming from. But to do that is inherently circular. You're taking something less certain and you're putting it underneath something more certain, which right away is a problem. Okay. It's circular because you're still depending on the perceptions to say what causes perceptions, right? And then worst of all, you have changed your sense of personal self. Because look, there's two senses of self here, right? There's two senses, let's see if I can do this. These two senses of self. One, which is your subjective self, what it's like to be a human and behave like a human and have a human experience and at least feel like you're willing and that you're inside this mind and body and you're doing something with it. Whereas this top view of self is as a third person. It's a person as though you're looking at a person. So it's the behavior of a person when you're watching a person behave. Well, the experience of being a person behaving, the subjective person, is different from the experience of watching another third person behave. And furthermore, to watch another third person behave, you have to have a subjective point of view to watch that from. So the subjectivity has to still happen. So when you want to replace that model and put it underneath the perceptions happen to us, you can't do that epistemologically. You have to leave that model up to, in the higher levels, in the less certain levels. You have to leave it up there. It's still an explanation, but the difference is that as an explanation, you can judge the various explanations the way you've always judged them, through these subjective stream of consciousness that you experience. So it's a descriptive model, but it remains a theory. If you try to put that below perceptions, it becomes a metaphysics where it can't be questioned, because there is nothing able to question things below experiences. We use experiences to question everything. So that's why you can't do that. It's also why you don't need to do that. And these cycles that you see where something appears more fundamental, because see, in the materialistic model, the existence of the external world is more fundamental than the existence of us as individuals. But for us to discover that, we have to exist as individuals. So for us, it's always going to be that our subjective experience is more primary. This would not be that important if, one, space wasn't so relativistic, physics wasn't so relativistic. And then we could pretend there was this third person objective point of view, and we could try to use that. But it is relativistic, and we don't have access to that. There doesn't seem to be such a point of view that we could discover and then jump to and somehow outsmart our limitations of having the stream of perceptions and nothing else to go with. So hopefully that describes why, what we're talking about, or at least how I'm interpreting what we're talking about. What you're asking me to do by accepting that these are metaphysical principles is you're asking me to take them down this chart, take something that I'm less certain about, and put it as more primary than something I'm more certain about. And I think that's contrary to what we need to do in philosophy or science or any building of knowledge. We have to start with the most certain things and work our way up.